Maybe tomorrow the sun will shine, but today
He was Korea's biggest star. Then his brother died, and he buried his voice with him. Now he runs an empire built on silence, fear, and blood, and nobody asks questions. But in the streets of Nairobi, a woman who has never heard his name is playing his songs on repeat. She doesn't know the man she argues with every single day is the same voice that makes her cry at 2 a.m. He doesn't know that she's the reason he started writing again. And somewhere between a salon chair, a borrowed guitar, and a war brewing on 2 continents, 2 people are about to collide with a truth that could destroy everything. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because once this story starts, you will not be able to stop. This is the song he buried. And it's just getting started. The melody came out of nowhere, the way it always used to. Kang Min-jae was sitting alone in the back room of Amani's cafe on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of quiet Thursday that Nairobi did better than anywhere else in the world, slow and golden, smelling of cardamom and roasting maize from the vendor outside. He had a pen in his hand that he hadn't meant to pick up. There was a paper napkin on the table that he hadn't meant to write on. And yet, when the melody moved through him, his hand moved with it, and words began to appear in Korean on a white napkin in a Kenyan cafe, like something being excavated from a place he had sealed shut years ago. He sang under his breath. Not performing. Not rehearsing. Just breathing the notes out the way a man breathes when he doesn't realize he's doing it. Amani Baresa was wiping down the counter near the window, and he paused, tilting his head slightly, listening. He was a calm man by nature, the kind of man who had survived enough of life to know when something rare was happening. He didn't say a word. He just listened. Min-jae sang 3 lines. Then he stopped, looked down at the napkin, and something crossed his face, something between hunger and grief, the expression of a man touching a wound he had been too afraid to examine. He folded the napkin and pushed it into the pocket of his jacket. He picked up his coffee. He looked out the window at the street like none of it had happened. Amani went back to wiping the counter. This was how it had been for the past 6 weeks. Min-jae came in, sat in the back, ordered 1 coffee, and wrote things he never showed anyone. Sometimes he hummed. Sometimes he didn't. But every time he left, Amani noticed that the man looked slightly less like he was carrying something immovable on his back. What Amani didn't know, what almost nobody in Nairobi knew, was that the quiet Korean man in the expensive jacket who always paid in cash and never gave his surname was Kang Min-jae, once the most talked about R&B voice in all of South Korea. Now the feared and untouchable CEO of the Kang organization, a business empire whose legitimate face was shipping and real estate, and whose other face was something nobody with sense spoke about out loud. What Amani also didn't know was that the songs Min-jae was scribbling on napkins and uploading anonymously from a private account under the name Noctis were the same songs currently playing in nearly every salon and matatu and evening gathering in Nairobi, including Zawadi Akiang's salon on Gong Road. Zawadi had discovered Noctis 4 months ago, the way most people in Nairobi had discovered him, through a voice note a friend had sent in a WhatsApp group at midnight with a message that said only, "I don't know who this is, but I have been crying for an hour, listen." The song had been called Baria Yusaku, which was not its original Korean title, but what someone had lovingly renamed it after translating the lyrics. The song was about standing at the edge of something you could never go back to. About watching something you loved become a version of itself you no longer recognized. Zawadi had listened to it once, then twice, then a 3rd time with her eyes closed, and by the end she had pulled her knees to her chest on her couch and stayed there for a while, feeling the strange particular grief of being moved by something you couldn't fully explain. She had been a fan ever since. Her salon, Zawadi's place, was a warm and deliberately beautiful space, not large, but every corner of it had been chosen with care. There were plants on the windowsill and framed photographs of Black women with extraordinary natural hair covering one wall. There was always a playlist going, and since Noctis arrived in her rotation, his instrumentals and vocals had become a permanent feature of afternoons in her shop. Her clients asked about him constantly. Who is he? Where is he from? Is he African? How does an unknown artist make music that feels this personal? Zawadi had developed strong opinions about Noctis, as she developed strong opinions about most things she cared about. She believed he was someone who had experienced serious loss. She believed the music was autobiographical. She had written 2 long posts in an online community called Noctis Army, defending him against people who accused his music of being AI-generated or inauthentic, and both posts had gotten hundreds of responses. She did not know she had also, on 3 separate occasions, argued fiercely with the man himself. The first argument had happened 5 weeks ago. Min-jae had come to her salon not because he had heard anything about it, but because Nam Suk-jun, his bodyguard, had been following a lead nearby and Min-jae had been told to wait somewhere ordinary. He had walked in the way men who are accustomed to being obeyed walk into places, without announcing himself, without looking around for permission, settling into the waiting chair with the silent expectation that things would arrange themselves around his presence. Zawadi had been finishing a client's braids. She had looked up at him, registered that he was unfamiliar, and returned to her work. "I'll be with you in about 40 minutes, she said. Min-jae had looked at her. "I'm not here for a haircut." "Then you're taking up a seat someone who is here for a haircut might need," she said pleasantly, without looking up. There was a pause. The client in the chair, a woman named Judith who came every 3 weeks, pressed her lips together to hide a smile. "I'm waiting for someone," Min-jae said. "There's a cafe 2 buildings down. Amani makes very good chai. I prefer to wait here." Zawadi finished the section she was working on, set down her comb, turned, and looked at him fully for the first time. He was well-dressed in a way that suggested he had never once had to think about money. He had the particular quality of a man who had learned to make his stillness feel threatening, and he was deploying it now as though he expected it to work. It did not work on Zawadi. "This is a place of business," she said. "If you're not a client and you're not picking someone up, then you're in the way. I'm asking you politely." Suk-jun had appeared in the doorway at that moment, filling it nearly completely. He looked at Min-jae. Min-jae looked at Zawadi. Then, without a word, he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out. Suk-jun followed. Outside on the pavement, Suk-jun had said nothing for a full minute. Then he said, "She threw you out." "She asked me to leave." "She threw you out," Suk-jun said again, in the tone of a man recording something for later personal use. Min-jae had said nothing. But something had stayed with him from the salon, not her face, not her voice particularly, but the quality of her indifference. It was not rudeness. It was simply that she had looked at him and found nothing there that required her deference. That was unusual. That was, if he was being honest with himself in the way he rarely allowed, interesting. He had come back a week later. This time he had sat in the waiting area properly and said he wanted a trim. Zawadi had raised an eyebrow because Korean men with expensive haircuts did not typically walk into her salon for trims, but she was a professional and she had sat him down and begun working without making it a conversation. He had looked at himself in the mirror for a moment and then said, "You apologize less than anyone I've encountered in a long time." "Why would I apologize?" she said. "You asked me to leave last week. You were in the way last week." "I wasn't wrong." He met her eyes in the mirror. She held the contact for exactly as long as was natural and then returned her attention to his hair. "Most people," he said, "don't speak to me like that. Maybe most people are afraid of you. And you're not." She looked at him again in the mirror, and this time there was something in her expression that was almost amused. "I don't know you well enough to be afraid of you. You're a man who came into my salon and sat in a chair. That doesn't frighten me." Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, but something. The Noctis song playing softly in the background was one called Kumbuka, named that by the same Nairobi translator who had renamed the first one. It meant remember. Min-jae heard 3 bars of it and his jaw tightened very slightly, the way it did when something caught him off guard. He said nothing. He paid. He left. He came back 3 days later. This became a pattern that neither of them named. He came in. They argued about something. It was never the same thing twice. Once it was about whether it was acceptable to keep people waiting without notice. Once it was about a news story she had on in the background about corporate land acquisition that he responded to with a detachment she found enraging. Once it was simply about whether the music she was playing was worth listening to, and that particular argument had gone longer than the others. "You don't like this?" she had said, genuinely incredulous, because the song playing at that moment was one of Noctis's most shared tracks. "It's fine," he said. "Fine." She repeated the word like he had said something offensive. "That's all you have? Fine. What would you like me to say?" "I don't want you to say anything specific. I want you to actually listen to it. Do you hear what he's doing with the second verse? The way the melody drops right there, that's intentional. That's someone saying something that can't be said in words. That's grief that knows it's grief." Min-jae was very still for a moment. "You seem very invested in a singer you don't know," he said. "I'm invested in the music. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. I don't care about the person. I care about what he made. What he made is honest. You can hear it. Some people make music that is technically correct and emotionally empty. This is the opposite. Whoever he is, he's made something real." Min-jae looked down at his hands. "You should tell him that," he said, quietly. "Maybe I will," she said. "I'm in 3 of his fan communities. Someone will pass it along." He said nothing else. But when he left that day, he went to Amani's cafe and he sat for 2 hours and he wrote more than he had written in any single session since his brother died. His brother, Kang Min-soo, had been dead for 4 years. He had been 23. He had been, in every way that mattered to Min-jae, the reason Min-jae had made music in the first place, the first and most honest audience, the one who had sat on the edge of the bed while Min-jae practiced and said things like, "No, that line is weak. Try again." Until the line was right. Min-soo had not wanted to be in the business. He had been gentle in ways that the Kang family history did not easily accommodate. He had loved football and terrible action films and his brother's voice, and he had died because of who their father was and a debt that had been passed down like a name. After the funeral, Min-jae had not sung for 8 months. Then he had taken over the organization, because there was nobody else who could, because leaving it leaderless would have meant more deaths. And he had been good at it, in the cold, efficient way that surprised people who only knew him from photographs taken when he was still performing, still smiling in music video sets with full orchestrations around him. He had not recorded anything for public release under his real name in 4 years. The Noctis tracks had started as accidents, voice memos he had made on his phone during insomnia that had somehow become full arrangements, that he had uploaded privately and then, one late night in Seoul before he came to Nairobi, made public on a platform he thought nobody he knew used. The response had been bewildering, and he had watched it from a distance, the way a man watches something through glass. He had not expected Africa. He had genuinely not expected Nairobi. And he had absolutely not expected a hairdresser on Gong Road to speak about his music with more precision and emotional intelligence than any critic who had ever reviewed his formal releases. He thought about that for a long time. Meanwhile, Zawadi's younger sister Nalwazi was becoming a problem. Nalwazi was 22, studying journalism at a university in the city, and she had recently developed the specific obsession of amateur investigative journalists everywhere, finding out who Noctis really was. She had been at this for approximately 6 weeks, and she was not untalented because she had already eliminated 14 candidates that various corners of the internet had proposed, had connected Noctis's acoustic signature to a specific type of Korean studio equipment from the late 2010s, and had noted that 3 of the background samples in his songs contained sounds that appeared to be Nairobi street noise, which placed his probable location as East African. She had shared none of this with Zawadi yet, because she was waiting until she had something more concrete. But she had shared it with Woo Hanol. Hanol was someone Nalwazi had met in a Noctis fan forum online, where Hanol went by the username static_808. They had bonded over a shared commitment to analyzing the musical production rather than simply consuming it. Hanol was extraordinarily good at technical audio analysis, for reasons that Nalwazi found impressive and somewhat mysterious. What Nalwazi didn't know was that Hanol was a hacker employed by Kang Min-jae's organization and had been loosely tasked with monitoring online activity related to Noctis to ensure that Min-jae's identity remained protected. What Hanol had not anticipated was genuinely enjoying Nalwazi's company, or finding her analysis uncomfortably accurate. In their most recent message exchange, Nalwazi had written, "I think he's in Nairobi right now." Not for long, but currently. The cafe sounds in track 7 are specific. I've been trying to isolate the background noise, and I think I know which part of the city. Hanol had stared at this message for a long time and then typed back, "That's impressive analysis." Then immediately opened a separate window and sent Minjae a priority alert. Minjae read the alert in the back room of the cafe. He read it twice. Then he looked out the window at the street, at a woman selling tomatoes from a wooden cart and 2 school children arguing over a phone and a dog asleep in the sun, and he thought about how ordinary this all was and how easily it could become complicated. He called Sukjun, who was outside. "We may need to move the recording setup," he said. Sukjun said, "How close?" "Close enough." "And the other thing?" Minjae knew what the other thing was. Back in Seoul, Baek Doo-hwan had been sending messages through intermediaries. Doo-hwan had been building a case, collecting connections, and had recently acquired what he claimed was audio proof that Noctis and Minjae were the same person. If that became public, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be a weapon. In the landscape of the organization's operations, Minjae's emotional vulnerability was considered a liability by men like Jang Tae-rim, who had called him from Seoul the previous week with a voice like dry paper. "You're singing again," Tae-rim had said. It was not a question. It was not a compliment. "That's not confirmed," Minjae said. "Don't insult me. Hanol tracks everything. There are new uploads. They sound like you. They are you." A pause. "I told your father when you were 17 that the music was a weakness. He disagreed. Now he is dead and I am still right. Is there a point to this call? The point is that Doo-hwan is using this. The point is that every song you release is a fingerprint. The point is that if he can prove Noctis is you, he has leverage over the entire structure. You know this. I'm handling it. Handle it faster. And stop writing songs in foreign countries." Minjae had ended the call and sat in the quiet for a long time. The next day, he had gone to Zawadi's salon. Not because he had a reason to. Simply because. He had sat in the chair and she had been in a mood, not a bad mood precisely, but the mood of someone navigating frustration, and she had been more quiet than usual. He had noticed. He was not, under normal circumstances, a man who noticed things like that about other people unless they were operationally relevant. The fact that he noticed it about her was something he chose not to examine directly. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm working," she said. "You're usually working and talking simultaneously." She looked at him in the mirror, and he could see she was deciding whether to say something. Then she said, "My sister is getting too deep into something that's going to consume all her energy and deliver nothing." "What is she researching?" Zawadi paused. "She's obsessed with finding the identity of that singer. Noctis." The word landed between them. "She thinks she's close," Zawadi continued, a note of reluctant pride in her voice despite herself. "She's smart, my sister. Too smart sometimes. She found some production analysis thing, some background noise thing. I told her to focus on her coursework." Minjae kept his face completely still. He was very good at keeping his face still. He said, "Why does knowing who he is matter? Does it change the music?" Zawadi looked at him in the mirror. "Of course it matters. Because if you know who made something, you understand it better. Art doesn't exist in a vacuum. The person shapes the work. Or the work can stand alone. That's what people say when they're hiding something," she said, and something in her voice made it sound less like a general statement and more like an arrow aimed somewhere specific, even though she had no reason to aim it anywhere near him. He said nothing. She said, "Do you ever listen to him?" "Noctis?" "I've heard some of the songs," he said carefully. "And?" "A beat. They're more than fine," he said. She laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and it was a real laugh, surprised out of her, and it changed her whole face. "More than fine," she said. "Coming from you, that's probably a standing ovation." He almost smiled. He caught it and held it back. That night in the cafe, he wrote a song that had her laugh somewhere in the arrangement, not literally, but in the rhythm of it, in the way the music moved, light and caught off guard and then deepening into something more serious. He knew this was becoming a problem. He knew it with the same clarity with which he knew everything he chose not to address. The situation changed on a Tuesday. Chikondi Mngale was a Malawian photographer who had been living in Nairobi for 2 years, shooting street photography and occasional event work. He was quiet in the specific way of people whose real job is to watch, and he had a gift for being present without being noticed. That Tuesday, he was on Gong Road photographing a fabric market when he caught, in the corner of a wider shot, something that made him stop. The man coming out of the salon, tall, Korean, something precise and watchful about the way he moved, was flanked by a second man who moved the way security moved. The shot was fine on its own. Interesting framing, natural light. But when Chikondi uploaded his batch that evening and zoomed in while editing, he noticed that the man's jacket had an interior pocket that was half open. And just barely visible was what looked like a company lanyard with Korean characters and a logo he recognized from somewhere. He ran the logo through a reverse image search. Kong Industries. Shipping. Real estate. Seoul. He ran the name connected to the logo. Kong Min-jae. He searched a bit further because he was a journalist at heart, and he found an older image from a Korean entertainment magazine, a young man with the same jaw, the same eyes, 10 years younger, performing on a stage in Seoul under bright lights. The caption said former recording artist, now businessman. Chikondi looked at his photograph again. He looked at the salon behind the man in a shot. He knew that salon. Everyone on that stretch of Gong Road knew Zawadi's place. He messaged Nalwazi because they moved in overlapping creative circles and because he knew she was working on something music-related. He said, "I think I might have something related to your Noctis project. What do you know about Kong Industries?" Nalwazi replied in under 2 minutes, "Tell me everything." Zawadi knew none of this yet. What she knew, that same Tuesday, was that McKenna had come into the salon at closing time with 2 takeaway containers of polo and an expression that meant she had thoughts she intended to share whether or not Zawadi invited them. The Korean man, McKenna said, settling into the waiting chair like she owned it and opening both containers. "No," Zawadi said. "I haven't said anything yet. You have that face." "This is my normal face." McKenna. "He came in here 4 times last week," McKenna said, handing over a container. "I have eyes. Judith told me. He doesn't need a trim every 4 days." Zawadi sat down across from her and picked up a fork. "He's a client. He looks at you like a question he doesn't know how to ask." "That's a very poetic thing to say about a man who mostly argues with me." "And you argue back," McKenna said. "When's the last time you argued with a man like that? Like you meant it, like it was worth your energy." Zawadi was quiet for a moment because McKenna was not wrong, and McKenna knew when she was not wrong and became insufferable about it. "He's not, I don't know who he is. I barely know his first name." Min-jae, McKenna said. "Korean. Probably wealthy. Probably complicated. Definitely interested." "How do you know he's wealthy?" Zawadi. "His watch." "I don't notice watches." "You noticed everything else though," McKenna said, and ate her polo with the serenity of someone who has landed a clean point. Zawadi thought about the arguments. She thought about what he had said, more than fine, and the small almost smile she had caught in the mirror before it disappeared. She thought about how he listened to her, fully, in a way that felt unfamiliar, like she was saying things worth the full weight of his attention. And then she thought about how little she actually knew about him, and about the quality of stillness around him that was not peacefulness, but something more guarded, something that kept the world at a deliberate distance. "He's hiding something," she said finally. McKenna chewed thoughtfully. "Most people are hiding something." "Not like this," Zawadi said. "It's not one thing. It's the whole shape of him. Like someone built a wall and then moved into the wall itself. And now they've forgotten there was supposed to be a house." McKenna looked at her for a long moment. "You've thought about this a lot for someone who just sees him as a client." Zawadi said nothing. She ate her polo. Sukjun came to Min-jae the next morning with a look on his face that meant news. They were in the apartment Min-jae was using in Westlands, and Min-jae was at the window with coffee, watching the early morning city organize itself. The photographer, Sukjun said. "Chikondi Mngale." He connected the company logo. "He's talking to the Aekying girl, the younger sister." Min-jae turned from the window. "How much does he have?" "The photograph. The logo match. He doesn't have the music connection yet." And Nawazi aching? She has the music connection almost entirely. She hasn't published anything. She's waiting for the full picture. Sukjun paused. Together, they have enough. Min-jae set down his coffee. Hanul, already in position to monitor. But she says the aching girl is good. If she keeps pushing, Hanul can't hold the digital side indefinitely. Min-jae thought about Zawadi. He thought about her saying, I don't care about the person, I care about what he made. He thought about how that would change if she knew. He thought about her saying, art doesn't exist in a vacuum, the person shapes the work, and what she would do with the information that the person was the same man she'd been arguing with about whether to keep chairs free for paying customers. There's also Do-hwan, Sukjun added. I know. He sent another message. He wants a meeting. He's not getting a meeting. He says if he doesn't get one by next Friday, he releases what he has. Let him. Sukjun looked at him. This was unusual enough that it was worth the look. Min-jae said, if he releases it, it comes out on his terms. If I release it, it comes out on mine. He picked up his coffee again. Find Kwon Ji-taek. Sukjun was still for a moment. Your producer. From before. He still has the full recordings from the last album. The one that was never finished. Min-jae looked out the window again. Call him. Tell him I want to talk. Min-jae, Sukjun said, and it was unusual for him to use the name directly, which meant it was important. If you do this, if you come out as Noctis publicly, it does not stay contained. Do-hwan loses his weapon, yes. But everything else opens up. The organization. Your face on music and your face on the business. Tarim will. I know what Tarim will say. People in our world will see it as instability. Or they'll see it as a man who cannot be controlled through something he values, Min-jae said. Which is harder to threaten. You can't hold music over someone's head if they've already given it freely. Sukjun was quiet for a long time. Then he said, your brother would have liked this plan. Min-jae didn't answer. He looked out the window and something in his jaw worked quietly. Make the call, he said. Kwon Ji-taek answered on the second ring, which told Min-jae that he had been waiting. That, for some reason, made something loosen slightly in his chest. Ji-taek was 61, rough around the edges, allergic to sentiment and fluent in it simultaneously, the kind of producer who had built careers out of his refusal to accept the first version of anything. You sound different, Ji-taek said, without a greeting. It's been 4 years. Not 4 years different. Different. Like someone opened a window somewhere. Min-jae said nothing to that. I kept everything, Ji-taek said. In case you were wondering. Every session file. Every voice memo you sent me at 2 in the morning. I didn't let the label touch any of it. Why? There was a pause. Because it was worth keeping, Ji-taek said simply. So, what are we doing? Min-jae told him. Ji-taek listened without interrupting, which was his highest form of engagement. When Min-jae finished, Ji-taek said, the new tracks. The Noctis ones. You recorded those alone. Mostly. Some arrangements done remotely with Hanul. Send them to me. All of them. I'll tell you what we have. Another pause. Min-jae. Yes. The last song you sent me before your brother died. The one you said wasn't ready. It's ready. It was always ready. You just weren't. Min-jae held the phone and said nothing for long enough that Ji-taek added, I'm not saying it to hurt you. I know, Min-jae said. Send me the file. He spent that entire night listening. The song was called, in his original working title, Dongsing, which meant younger brother. It was 4 minutes and 11 seconds long, and it was the most honest thing he had ever made in his life, which was why he had never been able to release it. Listening to it alone in the Westlands apartment at 3 a.m. with the city quiet outside was one of the harder things he had done in recent memory, and he had done some genuinely hard things in 4 years. He listened to it 3 times. Then he opened his phone and started writing. He did not go to the salon for 4 days. On the 3rd day, he saw on one of the Noctis fan forums, which Hanul had flagged for him, a post by a user called Zawadi Plays that said, the silence from Noctis this week is somehow louder than the music. I hope he's okay. Something about his latest release feels like a goodbye. And then, in the comments, the same user had written, I know this sounds parasocial, and I don't mean it that way. I just think some artists leave pieces of themselves in the work that matter, and I want that person to know someone heard it. He read the comment 4 times. On the 4th day, he went to the salon. She knew when he walked in that something was different. He was different in the way weather is different when something is genuinely coming rather than just threatening to. She watched him settle into the chair, and she said nothing for a moment, just picked up her tools, and then she said, "Where have you been?" He looked at her in the mirror. "Do you ask all your clients that?" "Only the ones who establish a schedule without realizing it." His mouth moved slightly. "I was working." "Something resolved?" "Something decided," he said. She began to work and they were quiet and Noctis played in the background, ironically, unfortunately, inevitably, the song she called Baria Yusaku, the one about standing at the edge of something you couldn't return to. He listened to it with a stillness that was different from his usual stillness. Zawadi said, "Your face changed." "Excuse me." When that song started, "Your face changed. Don't you like it?" "I told you," he said carefully, "it's more than fine. You said that once. Now you're hearing it differently." She met his eyes in the mirror. "Did something happen?" A long pause. "I've been thinking about something you said. About how knowing who made something helps you understand it better. And I'm not sure I agree. I think sometimes knowing who made something changes it in ways the maker didn't intend. Sometimes the work is safer without the biography attached." Zawadi considered this. "That sounds like someone who's afraid of what the biography says about them." He looked at her with something that was not quite surprise, but was adjacent to it. "I'm not trying to be harsh," she said. "But think about it. Why would you be safer anonymous unless there's something about you, about who you are, that you think would make people hear it differently? Less kindly?" He was very still. "And maybe that's true," she continued, tilting his head slightly to access an angle. "Maybe some people would hear it differently. But the people who matter, the ones who actually needed it, who were in their homes at midnight crying over a song they couldn't explain, they've already heard you. The real you. Before they knew anything else." The song shifted into its second verse. Minjae said, quietly, "What if who he is outside the music is genuinely difficult?" Zawadi's hands paused for just a fraction of a second, then continued. "Difficult how?" "Complicated. Involved in things that are, the world isn't simple. People aren't simple. What if the man who made those songs is also someone who has done things that are hard to reconcile with that much feeling?" Zawadi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think people who have no darkness don't make music like that. I've never believed that great art comes from uncomplicated people. It comes from people who are in the middle of something, who are fighting something, who are trying to find their way back to something they lost." She looked at him directly in the mirror. "And I think if Noctis came forward and said, 'Here's who I am, here's all of it,' there would be people who would judge him. And there would be people who would understand that the music was the truest part of him, even if the rest is messy." She finished the section she was working on. "You have very strong feelings about someone you've never met," he said. "I told you. I have strong feelings about the music. The person who made it is," she paused, and something shifted in her expression. "Some small uncertainty is real to me in the way artists are real to people who love their work. I'd probably be irritating to actually know." There was a silence in the room that neither of them knew what to do with. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it and his face changed, the window closing, the careful stillness returning. He stood and said, "I need to step outside." She watched him go. Outside, Sukjun was tense in the particular way that meant imminent development. Duhwan moved his timeline up, he said quietly. "He's releasing tonight unless." I said let him. Minjae, Hanul just found something else. He doesn't just have the audio match. He has a source inside G-Take Studio. Someone who confirmed the sessions. Minjae absorbed this. "Who?" "We're working on it. But tonight. Let him release." Minjae looked up and down the street. "We're ready." G-Take said he can have the statement and the track package ready. He's been working for 3 days straight. Sukjun paused. "He said to tell you the ending of Dong Sing is perfect and you shouldn't change a note." Minjae looked at the salon door for a moment. Through the glass, he could see Zawadi with her next client, talking and laughing, the kind of laughter that came from being genuinely at ease in your own space. The Noctis music was still playing through the door. "Tonight," he said. "We release tonight. What happened next moved the way serious things move in the age of the internet, faster than anyone can track in real time and slower than it feels when you're in it. Baek Do-hwan released his exposé at 7 in the evening, Seoul time, which was 11 p.m. in Nairobi. By midnight, Min Jae's team had released the official statement and the full album, not just the Noctis tracks, but the completed versions, the unfinished ones, including Dongsing, which went out under the full name Kang Min Jae with a single photograph. Not a performance shot, just him sitting in what was clearly a cafe somewhere, looking out a window, the angles suggesting Nairobi to anyone who knew the city. Nalwazi was awake when it happened. She had been talking to Chikondi, who had been talking to Hanol, who had, in a move that she would think about for a long time afterwards, gently confirmed enough for both of them to understand they already had the story before the story broke. When it broke officially, all three of them were awake and watching from different devices and different corners of the same city. Nalwazi opened a new message to Zawadi and then closed it. Then opened it again. She typed, "Are you up?" And then, "I need to tell you something about Noctis," and then, "Also about the man who's been coming to your salon." She stared at what she'd typed. She sent the first message and waited. Zawadi replied in 3 minutes, "I'm up." "What did you do?" It was the kind of phrasing that meant she was already nervous, already intuiting that whatever was coming had the specific weight of things that rearrange your understanding of the past several weeks. Nalwazi called her. The conversation was short not because there was little to say, but because some things require silence to absorb. Zawadi listened. At some point she sat down. At some other point she pulled up the release that was by now appearing across every platform, and she saw the photograph of the man in the cafe, and she recognized the particular quality of his stillness because she had been standing close to it for weeks. And she recognized the line of his jaw and the way he held his shoulders, and she heard the first notes of Dongsing come through her phone speaker, and she pressed her free hand flat against her kitchen table and breathed. The song was about his brother. It was the most transparent thing she had ever heard, the kind of vulnerability that costs something real, and she sat in her kitchen at midnight in Nairobi listening to Kang Min Jae sing about Kang Min Soo and thought about all the conversations they had had. Every single one of them, and the way he had listened to her talk about this music, about this unnamed person, about how the work was the truest part of a person even if the rest was messy. He had been sitting there listening to himself. She did not know whether to be moved or angry. She was, with the particular thoroughness of someone who feels things fully, both. She did not contact him that night. She turned off her phone at 2 a.m. and lay in the dark and let everything she was feeling move through her without trying to organize it. The next morning, she opened the salon at the usual time. McKenna was there by 9, having already consumed the entire internet's reaction, and she walked in with the face of a woman carrying something enormous and struggling not to drop it until she could set it down carefully. So McKenna said, "Don't," Zawadi said. "Zawadi, I know everything. Nalwazi called me. I have processed it to the extent I am able to process it before noon. I am going to work. Clients are coming." "He's Noctis," McKenna said anyway, because she needed to say it aloud, in this space, where the music had been playing for months. "I am aware. You defended him online for months. I am aware of that as well. You told him, you talked to him about." "McKenna, does he know your Zawadi plays?" "The forum account." Zawadi stopped what she was doing. She had not considered this. She turned slowly. "He doesn't know my forum name. Are you sure?" She thought about the comment she had left, "I want that person to know someone heard it," and about the way he had arrived the next day and been different. "Something decided," he had said. "Something decided." "Oh no," she said quietly. "Oh yes," McKenna said, not unkindly. The door opened and Tendaji walked in, Zawadi's older cousin, who had a look on his face that said he had also been on the internet and had opinions that were considerably less warm-hearted than McKenna's. "Mafia," Tendaji said. "Good morning," Zawadi said. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Not just businessman. The organization, Zawadi. You let a man from that world sit in your chair for weeks and you didn't." "I didn't know," she said, and her voice had an edge to it now. "That's the problem. You should have known." "How exactly was I supposed to?" "I'm just saying you need to think about what you're involved in now," Tendaji said, pulling out a chair and sitting heavily. Because it's not just music. It's not some romantic story about a sad singer. This man runs things that... I know what he runs, Zawadi said quietly. The room held that for a moment. I know, she said again. And I don't have a simple way to feel about it. He's not a simple person. The music is real and the rest of it is also real, and both things are true at the same time, and I don't have a resolution for that yet. She looked at Tendaji. I just need space to figure it out without everyone deciding for me. Tendaji looked at her for a long time. He was a stubborn man, but he was not an unkind one. Just be careful, he said finally. That's all. I'm always careful, she said. Minjae came to the salon at 11. He came alone. No Sukjun at the door. Just himself, and he stood in the entrance for a moment before stepping in, and when he met her eyes there was something in his expression she had not seen before. Not the controlled stillness, not the careful guard, but something raw and uncertain. The expression of someone who has taken off the wall they were living in and is standing in open air for the first time in years, and it is cold out there, and they are not sure they made the right decision, and they are here anyway. She looked at him. The salon was empty of other clients. The music playing was his. She hadn't changed the playlist, had not been able to bring herself to, and the specific song was the one he had written after she laughed, the one she called the light one. The one that always felt like something private even when she didn't know why. You knew, she said. It was not an accusation. It was the first square of ground to stand on. I knew after the first few times, he said. How you talked about the music. I recognized what I had tried to say in it. And you said it back. That must have been strange. It was the most honest I'd felt in 4 years, he said. Without trying. Zawadi was quiet. Then she said, the comment. I want that person to know someone heard it. That's why you came back the next day. He nodded. And decided. Another nod. She exhaled. You should have told me. Yes. That's not an acceptable reason to not tell me. I know. There were other reasons. The identity protection. My world. What it would have meant for you to know. He paused. And I was afraid. She looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. What were you afraid of? He said, that you would hear the music differently. That you'd hear me in it, and then look at everything else and decide the music was a lie. Is it? No. Then why would I decide that? He was quiet for a moment. Because I've done things that make it difficult to believe that someone capable of them also, he stopped. Also feels things that fully, she finished. Also grieves that honestly. He looked at her. I told you, she said. I've never believed the best art comes from uncomplicated people. She sat down in one of the salon chairs, not hers, one of the client chairs, like she needed to be at the same level as everything she was feeling. I'm not saying the rest of it is fine. I'm not saying I know what to do with it or what this is or what you are to me. I genuinely don't. But the music, I heard the music before I knew anything. And it's real. I'd stake everything on it. Whatever else is true, that's true. Minjae stood in the middle of the salon and looked at this woman who had thrown him out of a chair and talked about his music with more care than he had extended to it himself for years, and felt something shift in his chest with the finality of something that has been waiting a long time to move. Dongsing, she said quietly. That was for your brother. Yes. I'm sorry. He looked away for a moment. His jaw worked. He looked back. He would have liked you, he said. He would have told me within about 5 minutes that I was an idiot for not saying anything sooner. Zawadi almost smiled. Your brother sounds like my sister. Your sister, he said, with a different expression. Nalwazi. You know she found you. Hanal told me she was close. I underestimated her timeline. She's going to want to write about all of this. I know. She's going to want to write about me too, probably. Yes. I'm sorry for that. Zawadi looked at him steadily. Are you going to be honest with me? About what your life actually is. I'm not asking for everything at once. But I need to know that you won't. I need to know that the honesty isn't only in the music. He met her eyes. Yes, he said. I'll be honest with you. Outside, the city continued in its ordinary way. The fabric vendors and the matatas and the school children and Amani's cafe 2 buildings down. Where the music played and the cardamom coffee brewed and a table in the back, still had the faint impression of where a man sat alone with a napkin and a pen and a melody he hadn't meant to let out. Sukjun was parked across the street. He watched Min-jae disappear into the salon. He watched the door stay closed. He thought about 4 years of watching a man carry something that didn't have to be carried alone, and about how sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the enemy organization or the rival's evidence file or the exposure in the press. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is a song you thought you'd buried that was actually just waiting for the right moment to be heard. He looked at his phone. There were 17 messages from Taerim. He put the phone face down on the passenger seat. He could answer those later. Inside the salon, the music played. Outside, the city breathed. And somewhere in Nairobi, on a dozen different phones and laptops, on Matata speakers and in cafe corners, Dongsing continued to stream. A song about a boy who had died too young and a brother who had tried to silence the truest part of himself out of grief and hadn't been able to, because the truest parts of us are not easily buried. They only go quiet for a while. They only wait. They only need the right reason to return. Nalwazi, sitting in her university room with her laptop open and her notes spread across the bed, listened to it for the 6th time and began to type. Not the exposé she had planned. Something different. Something about music and anonymity and what we protect when we protect our identities and what it costs us and what we recover when we finally let ourselves be heard. Chikondi, across the city, developed his photographs from the Ngong Road fabric market shoot and looked at the corner frame, the man leaving the salon, the one he had thought was simply a subject, simply a face that matched a logo. He printed it out. He put it on his wall next to the others. He thought about the space between what something looks like and what it is. Hanol, online in a window nobody else could see, sent Nalwazi a message. I think you already know this, but I work for him. I should have told you earlier. I'm sorry. I kept your analysis from reaching the wrong people as long as I could. The music mattered to me too. Then, also your breakdown of the harmonic structure in track 4 was genuinely one of the best analyses I've ever read. Nalwazi stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, I have so many questions. Then, starting with, how does a Mafia hacker have this level of music theory knowledge? Hanol replied, I used to want to be a composer. Nalwazi replied, tell me everything. And in the salon on Gong Road, Kang Min-jae sat in a client's chair and Zawadi sat in the one beside it, and they really talked, the way people talk when they've stopped performing versions of themselves about Min-soo, about the salon. About what the organization was and what Min-jae was trying to make it into and how far he was from any of that, about what the music cost and what it gave back, about Nairobi and Seoul and the specific quality of grief that comes from carrying something alone for so long that you forget it was ever meant to be shared. At some point she put the playlist on something else, not Noctis, just music, and the afternoon went gold through the window plants, and McKenna came back at 4 and looked through the glass, and then looked away and texted Tendaji, they're fine, come down from high alert. And Tendaji replied, I'll be watching, and McKenna replied, obviously, that's your hobby. The story does not end there. It is not that kind of story. Because Taerim was still in Seoul with his convictions about weakness and leverage. Because Do-hwan, his exposure preempted, was now something more dangerous than a man with a secret. He was a man with nothing to lose, which was a different kind of threat entirely. Because the organization had structures that did not dissolve because one man decided to sing again, and the world Min-jae had been built into did not release its architecture simply because someone asked. And because Zawadi was not a woman who simplified things, and Min-jae was not a man who had finished becoming who he was going to be. And between them there was the distance of 2 very different lives and the bridge of something true that had been heard before it was explained, which is both the best foundation and the most fragile one. But in the salon, in the golden afternoon, the music played. And somewhere in a song about standing at the edge of something you couldn't return to, there was also, if you listened closely, the beginning of a direction. That's what music does when it's honest. It doesn't only carry grief. It carries you back toward yourself. And if someone is listening, really listening, the way Zawadi listened, the way she had always listened, maybe toward someone else as well, If you made it to the end of this story, you already know you're exactly who this is made for. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next, because this is only the beginning of Minjae and Zawadi's story, and what's coming will hit harder than anything you've read today. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit you the most, and if you felt something like this so more people find it. The song he buried has only just started playing.